Ben, cuba check dekat page Facebook tu.
Okay.
Ada tak?
Oh, on the Facebook page.
Ah, sebab kalau tengok dekat my computer ni dia dah jalan dah.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
Ada
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Guys, please be informed that sekarang ni I duduk dekat kampung. So land internet will be sometime disconnect. Tapi I just appoint Ben as a co-host, so anything dia boleh jalan je lah.
Okay.
Okay. Nanti Ben dalam pukul 12 you can enroll participant yang
admit lah basically here.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Nuurrianti nak jadi co-host juga ke?
Mana yang senang lah. Tak tahu.
Ada at least ada dua kan. Nanti seorang disconnect, seorang boleh jaga.
Okay.
Okay, make you co-host. Okay guys, everything is okay
Okay. Bisa kan.
Yep, thank you so much. So later for Q&A, basically we'll be taking questions. I'm usually just going to ask people to sort of type in the question. I mean, I can allow video as well, but generally is people can either type in the questions or they can put the questions on the Facebook live page. So I will update you guys later lah.
Yeah, or else you pick the question that you think good question, and then you ask us, and then we're just gonna answer.
Yeah. So depending on how long this goes, we can set it up differently lah.
Okay. You can still see my slides, right? Yeah.
So Bobby, Benjamin gonna control the slide, am I right?
You have access to it also, right? No?
Yeah, I have it.
I can request, but I haven't turned it on yet, basically.
Okay.
What? Sorry? I cannot hear him.
Sorry. Yeah, I will not be requesting access, so it will basically be Nuurrianti will be Bobby will be in control, and then if you want to just add anything, you can just switch whenever you like. I can control if you guys prefer lah, basically.
Okay.
How is it on Facebook?
Yeah, it's on Facebook. You can go and tune into it now, actually, if you want.
Yeah. I keep on doing cleansing.
Am I coming off as a bit soft? Is this better?
This one better compared to just now.
Yeah. My microphone is set to be a bit soft. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. If you guys are ready, I can start letting people in already.
Yeah, can.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. It's a bit of a courtesy because this is an online seminar, webinar basically. Please keep your microphones muted. You can keep your video on, but please keep your microphones muted if possible. We will have some room later for questions and answers, and you can raise your questions there. But I'll be giving a little brief. Like when I introduce everybody later, we can then sort of like talk about how this session is going to run. So I'll just wait for more people to start coming in. I've got about 80 over people who have registered, so I expect to see a lot more people, but people will stream in as this session goes on as well. Okay. Hope everyone is doing all right, keeping safe. You know, this today for Malaysians, essentially today is the start of our new conditional MCO, and we're entering a new normal, so to speak. So hope everybody is doing fine. Okay, you've got 33 participants. Hi Mazura, hi Izudin. Thank you for joining today's session. Hi Dr. Lina. Okay, wait for a few more people to come in. All right, I think let's just get this underway. Just get this started. So,
Okay.
welcome everyone to the second in our lecture series for the Media and Communication lecture series here at the School of Media and Communication at Taylor's University. This is essentially a series of talks. We originally planned this was all planned out before the start of this pandemic. And now with the movement control order, we've shifted it to be online as well. So this will be the first time we're running this. So please excuse us if there are a lot of like technical difficulties as we sort of like I try to iron out how to sort of like get this running as it is. So, but hopefully things go as smoothly as possible and we can sort of like have a good time during this session, a very informative session. So today's topic is titled Blaming Others, Stigma in Malaysia and Indonesia Amidst a COVID-19 Pandemic. It's going to be presented by Dr. Karlina Idris and Dr. Nuurrianti Jalli. And it is essentially a presentation about the work these the work that has been done very recently, very groundbreaking work essentially on how Twitter users in Malaysia and Indonesia are discussing the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm very excited to sort of present this work. And before I pass it along to them, let me just give you a little brief introduction to each and every one of them. Okay, so Dr. Karlina Idris is currently the Director of Research of the Paramadina Public Policy Institute and also an Assistant Professor at the Graduate School of Communication of Universitas Paramadina. Dr. Ika, a Fulbright scholar, holds a PhD in Media Studies from Ohio University. During her studies, she was a researcher in social media research team or the Smart Lab of Ohio University and received the Summer Research Excellence Awards from that Smart Lab. She has previously published research related to information literacy in Indonesia, fake news literacy among university students in the US, digital divide in rural Appalachia, government applications in Indonesia and Malaysia, and fake news during election time in Indonesia and Malaysia. Dr. Nuurrianti Jalli, or Dr. Bobby, as she often likes to be referred to, will be joining Northern State University in South Dakota as an assistant professor. Previously, she was a research fellow at the Center for Media Information Warfare Studies and a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Communication and Media Studies of University Technology Mara. Prior to receiving her PhD at Ohio University, she worked as a PR professional. She has also written for local newspapers and heads her own non-governmental organization in Miri, where she hails from, that assists orphans and single mothers in her local community. Her area of expertise includes the internet and democracy in Southeast Asia, social media research, and studies related to information disorders and media literacy. And I think I didn't actually do this before, but I'd like to just sort of introduce myself as well. My name is Dr. Benjamin Loh. I am currently the program director here at the School of Media and Communication in charge of the Bachelor of Mass Communication Honors Program. I'm also the chair for this MCLS series here, and that's why I will be your moderator for today. So the format for today is going to be very straightforward. Again, for those of you who are tuning in on Facebook Live, I apologize because there's a slight delay between what is sort of like being presented. So very simply put, I'm going to give the floor basically to Dr. Bobby and Dr. Ika to present their work. I believe Dr. Bobby will be presenting first, followed by Dr. Ika, and their presentation should be about half an hour to 40 minutes. After which, we're going to have about 20 minutes of sort of like a Q&A. And the Q&A basically will be, if you're in the Zoom meeting, feel free to just use the if you look under your reactions button, there is a raise hand function. You can use that function to indicate that you'd like to ask a question, and then I can give you space to ask your question. And alternatively, you can always employ the use of the group chat instead. So the same also goes for those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live. You can feel free to type in your chat, and I will sort of like pick up questions to be given to our presenters today to respond to. Okay, so with that out of the way, I will now pass it along to Dr. Bobby and Dr. Ika for this presentation.
Hey, good afternoon, good day, everyone, and assalamualaikum to all students. I believe we have students from Indonesia as well. We also have, audience from Malaysia. My name is Dr. Nuurrianti Jalli, but people call me Dr. Bobby, and I am an incoming assistant professor at Northern State University in South Dakota. And previously, like Ben introduced, I was working with UITM Shalam. So today we're going to present to you our latest research on stigma in Malaysia and Indonesia. This is going to be two portions. The first portion will be presented by me, where I'm going to give you a little bit of overview what stigma is all about, how previous research on stigma and diseases that was done before, and how we adopt those research as part of our guiding framework for our latest research on COVID-19. So here, let me just share with you slides we prepared for this presentation. I believe all of you can see this. So that's Dr. Ika, and that's me. So this is going to be our today's agenda. Some of the stuff that I'm going to present to you. First off, I'm just going to give you a little bit of overview what stigma is, and then we're gonna have a little bit of discussion on the vicious cycle of stigma. And I'm just going to give a little bit brief about research on stigma and diseases. 5 dimensions of stigma that we adopted from previous from previous research on HIV and stigma, and we adopted this framework as part of our current research. And I'm just going to give a little bit of sharing about the danger of stigma, especially during pandemic right now, COVID-19 and stigma around the world, some cases here in Malaysia and Indonesia. And of course, after that, I'm just going to hand over to my research lead, Dr. Ika. She's going to present on our research on stigma in Malaysia. And we're going to discuss a little bit of our interesting finding where we found there are more discussion about political part to handling COVID-19 beyond discussion on stigma, especially on Twitter. And then we're just going to have open Q&A if you do have questions. Okay, first off, I know that many of us, when we talk about stigma, we often associate it with what we call a stereotype. It is correct. However, the formal, what we call a definition by a popular stigma researcher, Goffman, in 1963, he said stigma is an attribute that is deeply discrediting and that reduces the bearer from a whole and usual person to a tainted, discounted one. If you talk about COVID-19, we know that COVID-19 started in Wuhan, China. And across the world, we could see that there are a lot of what we call stereotypes, against people from China or Asian in general. Those that look like Chinese, doesn't matter where you're from, either from Singapore, Malaysia, or even America. Some of this, our Asian friends are being stigmatized as a carrier of COVID-19. Yeah? Stigma can be based on one, physical conditions, negative characteristic, or backgrounds such as race, gender, or ethnicity. So why is stigma so dangerous? I believe there are a lot of our political leaders, also KKM here in Malaysia, Ministry of Health in Malaysia, talked about how important it is for us to minimize stigma, especially during COVID-19, because stigma will lead to what we call it a vicious cycle, where stigma going to breed negative perceptions. Negative perception, especially if we talk about in the context of COVID-19, are not only towards the sufferers of COVID-19, which I mean patients of COVID-19, but also people are closely related to the sufferers. Say, for example, family members or health workers. If you can see, there were a lot of news, not only in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Mexico, in many countries where frontliners, medical workers attacked because of prejudice towards and negative perceptions towards COVID-19. So when we talk about specifically towards patients of COVID-19, we talk specifically about patients of COVID-19, if they know that they are being stigmatized, of course, logically, we know that this will breed fear of discrimination. When people are afraid of discrimination, that will lead to another problem, which means that patients of COVID-19 then will avoid revealing that they have this disease or they are potentially, patients of COVID-19, or they were previously exposed to COVID-19 patients. So this will create avoidance of help, avoidance of getting proper resources to contain the disease. And this then will lead to untreated illness and then further transmission of the pathogen, and then it's going to make things even worse over time. So this is why stigma has to be, what we call it, mitigated, has to be minimized, especially during time like this. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about research related to stigma and diseases. There were, like I told you in the beginning, there were a lot of research on stigma and diseases. We adopted, at least for us, we adopted research that was done on stigma and HIV/AIDS. If you talk about HIV/AIDS, I believe in the early 90s, there were a lot of misconceptions about HIV, and that will lead to what we call it discriminations to HIV sufferers. And even there are research, what we call it, recent research on stigma in Ebola. In Africa, there were a lot of discriminations toward Black people from Africa. So you can see that stigma has been what we call it research by a lot of researchers from different disciplines, because even among health researchers, say for example, medical researcher, they believe that stigma also will lead to increased number of patients. So I think this is, if any of you are interested in looking at stigma and diseases, there were a lot of research, previous research that were looking into this. So now, here I'm going to share with you the 5 dimensions of stigma in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. So this 5 dimension of stigma was actually, we adopted from a research conducted by Zhuang and Breshnahan in 2012 on HIV and AIDS. So according to these 2 scholars, they were saying that stigma has at least 5 dimensions, which are labeling, negative attribution, separation, status loss, and controllability. So what does it mean by labeling? What does it mean by the first dimension, labeling? Labeling is the act of assigning an unfavorable descriptor to a problematic condition. If you think about Donald Trump, if you think about COVID-19, some of the terms he used to describe COVID-19 was not very well received by the public. Say, for example, he described COVID-19 as Chinese flu. Some of his Chinese virus, some of his member were calling it as Kung flu. So which means that you are labeling this what we call it, this disease in a very, what we call, negative term. So the second one is negative attribution. Negative attribution incorporates negative term to describe the person who has the disease or even the family members of confirmed cases, which means that we're just, we try to what we call it, attach certain terms to this, to the sufferer of COVID-19 or the member of what we call it, family members of the patients. Think about all the news reports, especially in Indonesia. When I cruise through what we call it, news reports comparing Malaysia and Indonesia, I know that in Indonesia there were cases of what we call it, protests. You don't want people to, there's a few villages in Indonesia denied burial of COVID-19 patients, and they describe this patient with certain terms. So we can understand the situation as number 2, negative attribution. Number 3, the third dimension of stigma is separation. It can be understood from the view that the person with unfavorable condition cannot have contact with other people. If you take a look at, if you think about what we call it, COVID-19, yeah. So if you, when you know that this person, when you know that this person has COVID-19, usually the public don't want to get too close with them, yeah. Because one, of course, COVID-19, we know that it's highly transmittable disease. Number 2, there's very little is known about the disease. Therefore, it is easier for the general public to separate themselves. So that is stigma. That's what we call it, the third dimension of stigma. Number 4 is status loss. It reflects situation where a patient, especially in the context of COVID-19, where a patient or the family loses their privilege of social recognition, including housing, education, employment, and healthcare. Number 5 is controllability, related to one's capacity to control the situation to avoid unfavorable conditions, including the responsibility for preventing such situation. If this person fails to do that, he or she will stigmatized. I will be stigmatized. If you remember this one case about a young man, in this case is in Malaysia, a young man who just returned from South Korea and went to the Tabligh Akbar, what we call it, 16,000 strong gathering in Sri Petaling. And when people found out about him, there were a lot of information about this person, especially on Twitter. So you see that this is the, what we call it, the 5th dimension of stigma. If you fail to control yourself, when you know that you potentially carry the disease, then you will open yourself up to be stigmatized. So that is the 5 dimension of stigma in the context of COVID-19. I believe if there is another, although we do, if you are to do similar research on stigma, you can adopt this framework and use it for your own research. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about why is stigma very dangerous during COVID-19. This is some of the, what we call it, generic aftermath, generic, what we call it, effect of stigma to people. Of course, number one, it will affect the emotional well-being and mental health of COVID-19 sufferers. There were cases, there were news that I read where, but this one is in the States where I think he was a veteran and he found out that he carried what we call it COVID-19. He was affected by COVID-19 and he committed suicide. So that because of the heavy stigma involving COVID-19. That's number one. Number two, internalize the stigma. Number two, if the what we call the patients or people affected by COVID-19, when they internalize the stigma they experience, they begin to develop a negative self-image. Of course, this is very generic. Number three, this we could see all over the news across the world, a certain group of people discriminated against or judged negatively if their health status is revealed. Some, in most cases, just because they're of certain race, they are discriminated against. That's number three, the impacts of stigma. Number four, internalized stigma can also, of course, lead to feeling of shame, fear of disclosure, isolation and despair. And number five, this is the most important right now in COVID-19, because if you keep on stigmatizing potential COVID-19 or the disease itself, it will keep people from getting tested and treated. I believe what we call it, our politician Hannah Yo made a statement on her Twitter and also picked up by media. So she was saying that do not stigmatize people that have COVID-19 or stigmatize COVID-19 in general, because that will keep people from being tested. And KKM, our Ministry of Health, also initiated campaign to educate people not to stigmatize, because people will run away, they don't want to go and get tested. And finally, it's going to put frontliners, you say, for example, often stigmatized in danger for working closely with COVID-19 sufferers. This we could see in Mexico. There were a lot of medical workers were attacked. And I believe also in Indonesia, there were cases, what we call it, medical workers, doctors, and health providers, like health workers, nurses, and whatnot, were kicked out from their rented rooms because people were afraid that this frontliners bring what we call it COVID-19. So that's the danger of stigma, especially during COVID-19. So this is some of the examples. I'm just going to go through this very briefly because I believe all of you also read this, what we call it, on the news. We could see because of stigma, we read that one Singaporean student and his friend were hurt in racist attack in Melbourne in Australia because of leaders like Trump were using very, certain label to describe, what we call it, to describe COVID-19, especially using the race card to describe what we call it, the disease. Even recently, yesterday was it that he had what we call it, exchange of he was arguing with one of the journalists and was telling this Chinese American journalist, Asian American journalist, to talk to Chinese government. So he's very racist person. I'm going to talk a little bit about responsibility of leaders, when it comes to minimizing stigma later on. And another case I want you to see here, although in Malaysia we do not see that, refuse a burial of COVID-19 victims, but Indonesia, there were a lot of cases that I read on the news, and of course Dr. Ika highlighted that as a part of our research also, fearing infection, that some Indonesian refuse burial of COVID-19 victims. And this one of the case that I spoke to you about in Mexico, where health worker attack amid COVID-19 fears. And I read, I think that what is also in South America, one health worker were splashed with acids, because they believe that acid will going to cleanse the health worker from COVID-19. This is all driven by stigma. So this is important also. I want to talk about the reason why stigma happens. Number one is because stigma is rooted in fear of something unknown. When we don't know something, we tend to have what we call a great fear about it. So like COVID-19, because it's a novel coronavirus, very little is known. So stigma during COVID-19 is rooted in fear, number one. Number two is that sometimes complicated information shared by health experts are too complicated to be understood by everyday people, so therefore they could not understand, which means also they could not learn much about the virus. So there's still many unknowns about the what we call the pathogen. Number three is low literacy. Low literacy in certain segment of society increased likeliness to stigmatize. Educated society has less likely to stigmatize in contrast to less educated community. So it was found in multiple what we call it previous research. So number three is low literacy level. And number four is very important also, is misinformation about COVID-19 in the media, especially the first few weeks of COVID-19. So there was so many misinformation on the internet. In Malaysia, say for example, there was one viral video where people were saying this person was affected by by COVID-19, that he became a zombie. So people believe that because they saw a video of this person shaking, but apparently the video was other video not related to COVID-19. Misinformation, of course, led to stigma. And number five is, of course, this is important also for us as a media scholar, as a media practitioners, as a future leaders, and also leaders, wrong choice of words by opinion leaders, media outlets, which consequently contribute to stigmatization, because we have to believe that words carry weight and words can color our reaction to people. Like if we go back to our example of Trump, he was saying about Kung flu, we're talking about Chinese virus. So that will indirectly, what we call it, influence people perceptions toward people from China or Chinese in general, or Asian in general, or Asian American, especially in America. So now I'm going to share with you some of the COVID-19 stigma in Malaysia and Indonesia. Here are some of the cases that we wanted to highlight. Say, for example, in Semarang, Indonesia, there was a village rejected burial of nurse died COVID-19 due to concern about the risk of possible infections. In Indonesia, also stigma not only against Chinese nationals, we also have that in Malaysia, especially the first few weeks. We're talking about banning Chinese tourists, banning, especially on Twitter. But after that, it went down, the conversation went down because of the strategic communication by our Ministry of Health. Stigma in Indonesia, we go back to Indonesia, we could see that medical workers and family of the sufferers were attacked. In Persahabatan General Hospital in East Jakarta, medical workers, nurses and doctors who treated COVID-19 patients have reportedly been kicked out of boarding houses near the hospital. And in Malaysia, if you remember, there were times, it's still the largest cluster. It's still the largest cluster in Malaysia, COVID-19. People describe it as tablik cluster. If you go to Twitter or to other social media platforms, this has created a negative perceptions towards tablik movement in Malaysia. So that's why I want you guys to think about how, especially when you are a media people, when you are working for the media, when you are, say, for example, leader, you have to carefully choose your words, or else it's going to influence people's perception or opinion about certain group of people or certain issues. So what can we do to minimize stigma? So of course, what we call it, we have decided to break it down into 4 main points, but this is not limited to this. Yeah, number 1 is protect. Maybe we can create anti-discrimination law and regulations to mitigate harassment and prejudice towards affected group. Number 2, we include people accessible, affordable healthcare to include all segments of community. Like in Malaysia, we provide even for what we call it, foreign workers. We provide that by the companies, and then the government also assists with letting this foreign worker to be tested. So we don't want this certain group of people to be excluded from accessing what we call it affordable healthcare assurance by the government to protect all regardless of race, social status. Education, yeah, educate people is very important. Providing information on COVID-19 frequently to the public, which in Malaysia we already did that, and I believe Ika going to present later on the situation in Indonesia. And avoid reading unverified information, particularly on social media, on the internet. Refer to well-established information provider, because we don't want to be we don't want to be the next victim of misinformation. Address fears by reading and learning more about the pathogen. And responsibility, of course, media and leaders have to be responsible in covering stories related to COVID-19 to avoid unintended consequences, unintended stigmatization to the wrong choice of words. And now I seriously call for everyone to actively participate by correcting any misinformation that you see online, because by active participation, we will be able to help in minimizing stigma. And this is some of the example of campaign against stigma in Malaysia and Indonesia. This is a poster that was created by KKM, Kementerian Kesehatan Malaysia, Malaysia Ministry of Health. Yeah, so they were talking about stigma because they believe, at least in Malaysia, they don't want people to be afraid to get treatments. Yeah? Then here is one of the example of campaign in Indonesia to stop stigma. In Indonesia, there were so many NGOs, there's so many institutions promoting what we call it, mitigation against, to stop stigma, because stigma has impacted Indonesia very, what we call it, significantly, especially during this COVID-19. So there were a lot of organizations trying to help by, initiating such campaign. So now I will hand over this presentation to my good friend Ika on the research. So you want me to play it on? Okay.
Yes, please. Okay, thank you, Dr. Bobby. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So after from that situation, and then from the previous literature, we then come to at least two main research questions. First, how do Twitter users in Malaysia and Indonesia stigmatize COVID-19? And then what is the content of tweets related to the stigma of COVID-19? I just want to let you know that we keep this research ongoing because during this time, the stigma also moved to a different dimension. But I will tell you later in my last presentation. Could you please next, Bobby? Okay, so I know in Malaysia you found the first case during February, yeah. During February, but in Indonesia we officially acknowledged the first case in March. So then we decided to collect all the data during March, and then we use the keywords Corona and Indonesia and Corona and Malaysia. We use tools to crawl the data, and then for a month we collected 450,000 Twitter conversation. Just for your information, because the number of because Indonesia has a higher number of population and higher number of social media users, so tweets from Indonesia is way larger than from Malaysia. When we collect the tweets, we decided to exclude the promoted conversation. I'm sure both of you, all of you know that Indonesia and Malaysia, we are suffering from the fake news. So we decided to exclude the promoted messages, all the tweets that related, retweeted or reshare. So we deleted all those tweets, and we end up only having 23,500. So that's how much the original tweets that we found. And then from there, we also, by using simple random sampling, we selected 6,900 tweets. And then at first, we were trying to use sentiment analysis tools. It's for a big data, it's easier for us if we use the tools. But when we try at least 2 tools with different language annotation, we found that it's better to use human coders, because the stigma, if the characteristic of stigma is kind of similar with hate speech, it is really specific. For the sentiment analysis tools, they usually give numbers for each words. If it's really positive, the tool's gonna give it like +5. If it's really, if it's somehow positive, the tool's gonna give the word +1. For example, if we use a sentence like Ika darahnya halal. So it's an example from a hate speech. Ika, because it's a name of a person, it's gonna score 0. Darah or blood, it's gonna score -1 until -2. But halal, because it's very positive, it's the tool's going to score it +5. So if we add -2 and +5, we're gonna end up having +3. So the tools is going to score it +3. So it's gonna be a positive sentiment. But we all know that the sentence Ika darahnya halal, it's a negative sentiments, and even it's contain hate speech. So that's the same case with stigma. When we try to use the tool, we still find that the human coder is more reliable than the tools provided. Yeah, maybe if you are in the graduate program and if you are interested in this kind of social media analytics tool, you can do research in that. Yeah, like language sensitivity. So we use 2 human coders who understand both Bahasa Indonesia and Malaysia, and then we train them to understand our categorization and the tweets, and then we end up having, after 3 times practice, we end up having reliability result for all the categorization. Okay, so the finding, we found that the majority of the object of the stigma is related to one's background. For some cases, for instance, for stigma in drug users, the dominant stigma is mostly, in the literature, is mostly related to negative characteristic. So if you are lazy, you are tend to be drug users. But in this case, in the COVID-19, the object of the stigma is not physical condition, not negative characteristic, but one's background, mostly related to their nationality or their race or their religion, even in the case of Malaysia. Next will be. So, and about from our sample, 6,900 tweets, we found only 5% tweets that contain stigma. So this is from original tweets. Maybe if we don't deleted the promoted tweets, maybe it's more, but we keep the original tweets. So it's very low, only 5%. And then the majority or the main stigmas in Indonesia, you can see that we found different stigmas. In Indonesia, the majority of stigma is labeling. And then in Malaysia, the majority is related to controllability or responsibility. And then we don't find any stigma related to status loss or negative characteristic in Malaysia. Yeah, after that we try to understand to what are the words that Twitter users wrote when they tweet about stigma, and then we found that in Indonesia the top words are related to virus, government, country, China, plague or wabah, enter or masuk, and positive. Yeah. So if we look at China, the common words that use with the word China is corona virus. As a background, if you are from Indonesia, maybe you know this, but the public thought that the government, Indonesian government, is really slow in handling this case. So although COVID-19 had found in Singapore and Malaysia, but during that time in February, Indonesian government still allow some of the Chinese workers come from China to work in Sulawesi region. So the public thought that this is because the government really slow in handling the COVID-19. And then, but when we look at Malaysia tweets, most of the words are tablik, virus, akbar. Of course, tablik, akbar is the same group. People, positive, event, infected, and case. So when we look at the top words, it's mostly related to the tablik akbar Muslim group events that also called tablik cluster, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then this is some of the example of the tweets. There's also a strong tendency to blame China in Chinese in Indonesia because of their action to Muslim Uyghur. So so the tweets kind of think that you deserve the COVID virus because you did bad things to Muslim Uyghur. And then there's also tweets related to government action. But in Malaysia, these are the two examples of the tweets that related to this is because of the Jemaah Tabligh, but there are also acknowledgement that at the first people in Malaysia also thought that this COVID-19 was brought from China, and then now this is because Jemaah Tabligh. So you can see that the stigma, it's kind of dynamic and changes through time. And then okay, and then we found there was a strong sentiment from both countries to blame others. In Malaysia, is to blame certain Muslim group, and in Indonesia, the tweets blame the China or caused by Chinese. Okay, we found that the tweets containing elements of stigma were not as dominant as evaluation of government responses. So in Indonesia, where we went through the tweets, there's really a strong sentiment related to government, and then compared to criticism of the government bad performances, it's 6% and 84.6%. But then I want to tell you a little bit about the stigma on in April. So our research is during March at the early case of COVID in Indonesia, but during April we found that the different stigma perceived by the Indonesian people, it mostly the dominant or top words that we found is like infected, rejected, or need to be separated. So we found a strong tendency in April in Indonesia, specifically related to rejection of the COVID patient or COVID patient that already recovered and going back to their neighborhood. In Malaysia, however, most tweets were related to government's appeal to stay home. So this is also kind of interesting because in Indonesia, you can see there's a issue of distrust of the government policy and government action, but in Malaysia, we can see that the public kind of support the government policy to stay home. Yeah, maybe you can continue, Bobby.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I muted myself. So that's the end of our presentation. Actually, okay, can you guys hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the end of our presentation. But I want to share with you. We actually, Ika and I, we wrote an article about our research in March on the conversation where we highlighted some of our main findings in the article. If you want to access the article, you can scan the QR code if you still can see the slides. And actually, like what Ika said, we of course stigma is dynamic over time. At least in March, we've seen the stigma is more focused on what we call it labeling, and in Malaysia we're talking about blaming others. But now the stigma has changed because at different time, a different thing that we focus on, different issues that arises. So we hope that we are still continuing this research, and then we're going to contrast it with our early findings. So if you have any question about stuff that we do, the research that we currently doing, you may drop your question. I believe Ben going to pick it up. And if beyond this presentation, also if you have any question, you can always email us at we'll drop our email address later on for Ben to share. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, ladies. That was a very, very interesting presentation. Wait, hold on. Let me just back to yes, that was a very, very interesting presentation, and I do indeed have several questions to share with you. Let me just bring up. There's 3 so far. Let me just share my screen now to sort of so you can sort of see it. Hold on, let me see. Okay, there we go. Can you see it or?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so this is the first question by Philip Gunn. So he asks, does the literature indicate that people who have preconceived discriminatory perceptions towards a community strengthen one's stigma towards that community? And the second part of the question is, how can we reduce stigma if there are people stubborn to change their views despite evidence to the contrary?
Maybe I can start with addressing this question. Ika, if you want to add on later on, you can just, answer it. But to Philip Gunn, thank you for the question. I like your question because this is the question that I asked myself as well. Does the literature indicate that people who have preconceived discriminatory perceptions? Yes, that will amplify stigma towards certain people. This is what I observe, especially in America, because when I was in the States, I took like a few classes on critical race theory, because some people, they have this, what we call it, closeted, what we call it, racist sentiment towards certain group, and having the situation will, having this, say for example, COVID-19 caused by people they have negative perception on, will of course amplify that stigma towards that certain community. There are a lot of research also that has talking, but not specifically to COVID-19, but on other diseases that was talking about your will amplify your stigma towards certain group. And if you're talking about how do we reduce stigma, if there are people stubborn to change their view, it is something that we struggle on right now. The government response, at least in many governments, they're trying to, in Malaysia, so for example, trying to educate people that COVID-19 is not exclusive to a certain group of, certain group of race or certain group of ethnicity. Is going to impact all, although the, what we call it, although the starting point of the disease was from China, say for example. So I think education is the way. However, it's easy to say this than done. If people, we can only give, but if people refuse to take it, it's another issue that we really have to look into. So which means that I do not have like specific answer to that, but I always believe in education, educate. Ika, if you want to add on to answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Philip Gunn. Yeah. In our literature, we found one literature related to stigma in SARS, in social avoidance of recovered SARS patient in Hong Kong. So in that literature, they found that the preconceived perception strengthen one's stigmas even for the recovered patients. So yes, at least from those literature. And then why do people still have stigma? So this stigma, we found it from a classic works theory that we call the theory of belief in a just world. So belief in the just world theory basically said that people believe that what you give or what you do is what you get in return. So if you are poor, that's because you're lazy. That's basically the belief. So it's that's the foundation that we use. But sometimes people who believe in this just world forget that it's not always that one's negative characteristic that cause him to be poor. So for instance, even though you work really hard, if the system in your country doesn't elevate you to become to have like better education, or do not open the better access to work, then however work you hard, you're still gonna be in that situation. For the education in our limited literature, we haven't found that, but we found the correlation between the weak religious group and strong religious group. So people who have a strong religious belief tend to believe that the life after. So if you are so the belief in a just world tend to persistent in that group compared to the group who has like a weak religious beliefs. So yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you for that. Okay, there's a couple more questions in there. Hold on, let me just
Yeah.
scroll through this.
Yep.
Okay, I think we should, maybe this one by Awad Al-Khatiri would be a good question to ask, to answer. How can we control the stigma around the society as individuals? Do we need any community or government support or media to stop people to stigmatize about this disease?
Okay, maybe I can answer this question, but Ika, as usual, if you have additional input, you can always add on later on. How can we control the stigma around society as individuals? I always like to revisit studies when it comes to culture exposure and stigma, which means that some segment of society are not exposed to other culture, therefore they have some misconceptions that will lead to stigma, as one of the byproducts. So if you talk about controlling stigma around society as individuals, if you go back to my presentation just now, one of the recommendations is that for us to be active participants, we do not be another, we cannot be another silent observer when you see stigma going around society. If you know that is wrong, try to stand up for the stigmatized person or individuals by providing information, by, if you do not have information, redirecting this person to reliable sources. Do we need any community or government support or media to stop people from stigmatized? Of course, we need their help because we cannot rely on only one source. It is always good to have like what we call join forces together. Like I said, even the leaders have to be extra careful about choosing words. Even in Malaysia, I know it's unintended that we use tabligh cluster. That what we call it has indirectly. I know that the government do not have that intention, but that has indirectly affected conversation on Twitter where people stigmatize tabligh movement. You get what I mean? And media, of course, to actively promote that. Why stigma is very dangerous, especially during pandemic. We're not going to talk about misinformation. Misinformation and infodemic is of course one of the things that we witness has created another major issue that we have to deal with during COVID-19. But if you try to, what we call it, really look into misinformation, one of its byproduct is also stigma. So I think we have to work, what we call it, join forces together as an individual, as a community, as a media people, media practitioner, or as a government body to really work and address this issue so that we can, even if we cannot eliminate stigma, we can minimize stigma. So Ika, if you have any additional information on that.
We actually wrote about how we can help to control or minimize stigma in our presentation, but I just want to add a little bit from the classic work of Just World Research. They by Miller, and they really emphasize about empathy. So I know it sounds simple, yeah, but it's the answer is to grow your empathy toward others. And then what I encourage you this day, some of the recovered COVID patients, they are very active on social media, telling what kind of treatment or what kind of stigmas that they receive from their neighborhood, from their families. I think if you can join that conversation, you can follow the person and then listen to their stories. I think it's going to help you to grow your empathy if you cannot really relate to that person condition or situation.
Okay, thank you for that. We've actually got a lot of questions, and we are technically supposed to end at 1, but if the speakers are all right, I can push this maybe another extra 15-20 minutes if you guys are okay with this.
I'm okay. Ika, are you okay?
Yeah, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay.
Because I have another meeting.
Okay. Okay. So here's another question which I think is very important. It's by Bobby Hermawan Arifin. Is there any connection between the government's inability to deal with the coronavirus that caused many people to have a negative stigma against COVID-19 survivors? And what do you think about educating people with low level of education and tend to be more conservative?
Hey, you want to answer that?
Okay. So Bobby, thank you for your questions. This is another Bobby.
Yeah.
So we don't really go into this in our research, but from my observation and from I work with one of the government agencies right now related to this COVID-19 conversation. And yes, at the very beginning or at the early stage, Indonesian government, I must say that they are really handling this pandemic really poor. They're handling it poor, so they kind of tend to look this pandemic as something that we can just pass on. It's gonna end somehow in 1 week or two. So because of that, government do not really understand the situation, and they don't really focus on what's happening or what on the conversation, because starting from that time, people already start to stigmatize the situation. And about the low level of education, I haven't, again, in my limited literature review, I don't find that about the education level. But then I believe it's not about the education, but it's about the how knowledgeable you are. You know, during this pandemic, not only low level education people who spread hoaxes, but also high level education people that spread hoaxes because it's not in their area of expertise. You know what I mean? Maybe because my area of expertise in communication, if there's like a current research about this pandemic that I don't really understand, maybe I can I can be really tempted to share the news. But then we found the relation about the conservative view.
Yeah, I want to add on that. If you go back to our slide on what causing what we call a stigma, one of it where we're talking about low literacy. Low literacy can be understood by what explained by Ika, because it's not your area of expertise. Therefore, you have low understanding of the issue, which is correct. And another one I want to add on that, because we have to also understand, we have to also look at the capacity of individuals' ability to find what we call reliable information. If you go back to some of the previous research on fake news and who are the people that tend to share misinformation. Say, for example, there are a lot of what we call it scholarly article that indicate low education, people with low education that share such information, although not limited to them. If you ask me, if you ask some of the suggestion made from scholarly article published before, how do you educate people with low level of education? Say, for example, this group of people, most of them just graduated high school, therefore they do not understand medical terms, they do not understand all this heavy stuff. How do you approach them? So a lot of what we call it pedagogical research propose that if you are to talk about complex issue to people that have very limited understanding of this heavy jargons, you have to go what we call it to the level, which means that you have to use easy words, you have to use cases where they can relate on to have greater impact. to make them more understanding of the situation. But when it comes to talk about how do we deal with people who are more conservative, because of my limited reading on that, I have to revisit that question. It's a very good question. I think it's a potential topic for us to explore in the future. More conservative is different than education, because we're talking about theological belief. We're talking about this spiritual element to it. So I do not have what we call it a very cohesive response for that one. I hope that we were able to give you some insights on your question, Bobby.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we have time maybe for a couple more questions. So
Yeah.
let me just, okay, so this is one more. So this is by Karen Grace Pritz. Do you believe we hide behind our innate need to shift blame onto others and not take responsibility in the context of COVID-19 by stigmatizing and engaging in targeted discrimination?
You want to answer that, Ika, or you?
Yeah, that's a tough questions actually. Thank you, Karen. So back to our the classic theory that we use, that there's a tendency for us to blame others, that we said that you deserve what you deserve what you got, you know. So that tendency, that belief is maybe it will affect how you put responsibility to other people. And then yeah, I think that's for me.
I think if we are to talk, although this is not my area of expertise when it comes to human psychology, we tend to blame other people because that's a human nature. If you go and revisit some of the previous research, I can name some here. They were previous research on blame contagion that was written by Fast and Tiden. It's in a journal of experimental social psychology in 2010. They were saying that it is almost like human nature. We tend to avoid responsibility, and if we can find someone that we can shift that responsibility on, and that person is that group of people, that person that have that supposedly have great potential to be blamed, we shift that blame to them.
Yeah,
because
psychology, it's easier. Yeah? It's easier to blame other people than to take action.
Yeah, because we're talking about here, if you talk about psychology, here we're talking about moral dilemma also. We're talking about the philosophical to it also. So I think if you ask me for my personal opinion for this question, I believe, it is in our innate, being. We as a human tend to shift blame onto others because we don't want to be blamed for something, even if it is our fault. You get what I mean? Unless you have a very strong moral compass. So again, this is another question, another argument about whether a human is evil by nature or good by nature. So that's another philosophical question to it. But if you ask me, yeah. But maybe some other people might not have the same response like I do. But we do not address this in our research, but perhaps we could explore. Thank you so much, Karen, for this question.
All right, thank you. Okay, so last question. I think I think as great as your research is, I think a lot of these things are quite limited in scope. You know, the research is done on social media, and I think this is such a big issue that not enough information or research is being done. So people are thirsty for this kind of noise, and there's actually a lot more questions here, and unfortunately, we don't really have much time.
Yeah.
So this is just the last one. I think it's the one that's most interesting because Edison asks, "Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know if you are planning to conduct a further research on the impact of stigma to the psychological of COVID-19 positives."
Yeah, that is one. Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, Addison, for this question. Yes, if you ask me personally, yeah, I would like to look into the social psychological aspect to it, or clinical psychology aspect to stigma, the impact of stigma to onto COVID-19 sufferers. Yeah, because if you talked about stigma, like I presented before, a study on stigma, not just by social scientists. There are so many researchers from different disciplines looking at stigma. So this is another door for you if you're interested in psychological impact of COVID-19 patients. Yes, you can do that. And I am also interested to do the same research. However, I'm not so sure if I do have time, like other scholars, we have so many ideas, but in terms of execution, we don't know whether we can do it. But if you are interested in this research, I would encourage you to do so. And I believe here, I don't know if the Ministry of Ministry of Health here in Malaysia can release the name of some of the sufferers that you can interview, perhaps to get information for them, or if you personally know those that are impacted by COVID-19, you can approach them. I believe we need this information, especially in the context of Malaysia or Indonesia in Southeast Asia, because there are so many literature that focus on the Western country, developed country. We need more on our side, because we have different culture, we have different set of belief, we have different environments. So Addison, I would encourage you to do that. Yeah, Ika, you wanna
Okay, as I said before, this is ongoing research. We haven't really figured out like where we're going to bring this research. But I think the topic that you are mentioning is really good, especially because from our literature, those who can help to minimize the stigma is those who had the conditions before. So if there is recovered patients who trying to campaign or to minimize the stigma, as a social scientist, as a scholar, you need to do research on this. Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, thank you very much for that, ladies. I think that was a splendid session that we have.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it has come to an end. There's plenty of more questions here as well. For those of you who are actually interested, what I can do actually is that I can forward these questions to Dr. Bobby and Dr. Ika, and they can respond to it. And I can also put it up on our Facebook post, because I'm planning to putting this up on our Facebook page. I will probably share a link out with the people who registered for this session. And I'll also include a link that the ladies have put up with together with the confirmation. So if you'd like to sort of follow up, learn more about this, or really just sort of like get involved in the research, because this kind of research is very, very crucial in this time. And it's especially important because not enough research is being done, especially at the regional level here within Southeast Asia. So I think that's great kudos to both Dr. Nuurrianti and Dr. Ika for sort of like being at this forefront of doing sort of like groundbreaking research like this. Okay. So with that in mind, thank you very much to everybody for participating. We've got quite a lot of people that were here, and thank you for all these lovely questions. They were really, really very good questions, and I hope.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome, Dr. Bobby and Dr. Ika. So with that in mind, we are going to call it a wrap for today. For those of you who are fasting, happy fasting. For those of you who are in Malaysia, please enjoy day one of the CIMCO. And for those of you from Indonesia, thank you for coming today and watching this cross borders. So with that, thank you so much here from the School of Media and Communication here at Taylor's University. And this is Dr. Benjamin Loh, and we're signing off. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Ben, can we wrap up?
Yeah, we can wrap up. It's over. Then please
Okay.
can end the session. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.